So there's been a reasonable amount of research looking at the impact of transitions, and there are three main sources that are providing the data in this research. There was a paper published in 2019 which looked at 27 studies about autistic children's transitions from nursery to primary and primary to secondary. And in these 27 studies, 31% of the respondents were parents of autistic children. The biggest group of respondents was teachers at 38%, and autistic children were the smallest group at only 30%. In this particular paper, there is no mention of how many of those children were girls, and where girls were included in the individual studies, there was no discussion about the potential differences between the experiences of boys and girls. I looked around to try and find a figure for the voices of women and girls being included in research about autism, and couldn't find anything more recent than 2014. But the 2014 paper was a review of nearly 700 articles, and that included data from autistic participants that were from prominent journals, and that found that only 14% of participants were girls or women. So it's really important to consider how girls on the autism spectrum might differ from boys in their experiences of transitions, and to make sure that we're really considering how we can promote those voices of autistic girls. Our understanding about the differences between autistic girls and boys is increasing. I'm really aware that I'm going to be generalizing here on this particular slide. Every autistic child is different. I'm also aware that there's a growing body of evidence looking at autism and gender identity, which is a really important area of study, but it's beyond the scope of this piece of research. And I apologise too for focusing on a really deficit-based view of autism in this one slide, but be reassured that there will be a celebration of autistic strengths coming later. So, autistic traits in girls and women are often different to those in boys and men. Girls are likely to show fewer repetitive behaviours, be more social, have more problems with internalising behaviours rather than externalising, and are more likely to use camouflaging or masking to hide their autistic traits. It's suggested that as a result of these differences, autistic girls are underdiagnosed, and where girls do receive a diagnosis, it's likely to happen later than boys, and girls are more likely to be diagnosed if they have higher additional needs. The result of this is that support for autistic girls and women is lacking, which has a really negative impact on well-being and mental health. So it's important for me in this research to ensure that the voices of autistic girls are clearly represented and shared to begin to redress the balance. So for my project, it was important to address the following issues. First of all, to include the voices of autistic young people about their experiences in a meaningful way, to consider embodied experience of transition and what they add to our understanding. And what I mean by this is that by supporting children to talk about their embodied experiences, we can actually get a better understanding of issues such as sensory processing differences, which are very difficult for a non-autistic person to identify with, and which are very important when it comes to thinking about educational transitions. I'm wanting to promote the voices of autistic girls who are largely missing from the literature, and to include autistic young people in the dialogue about how to improve transitions. This links back to the ACORN's focus of making a difference to practice, and I feel it's really important that any strategies that are suggested should come from the autistic community who have lived experiences of this transition, as opposed to a community of researchers, no matter how well-meaning and how much information they've gleaned from the autistic people. I think the autistic people need to have their voices included in this dialogue. So the project itself, I've been working with 6 absolutely wonderful 13 to 18-year-old girls as co-researchers. We've chosen to call our research group FISAC, which is made up of our initials. And this slide shows the Bitmojis that we've created to include in our work. We are great fans of Bitmojis. If you haven't discovered them yet, do Google them. They are fantastic. So together we've used a technique called body mapping to reflect on the girls' time in education and the primary to secondary transition in particular. And as I've said, I'll explain a bit more about body mapping later in the presentation. So as a group, we meet online every Tuesday evening In the autumn term, our meetings were focused on experiences of both primary and secondary school. We talked about transitions. We talked about the differences between autistic boys and girls and the way they are supported. We talked about the difficulties of getting a diagnosis and why receiving a diagnosis was particularly important to them. We also talked about pizza, sloths, archery, lots of other things. The group have a very diverse range of interests, which makes for some really interesting and dynamic discussions. So one of the goals of this first part of the research in the autumn term was to design and create resources to support with transitions, and I'll say a bit more about this later. So from those discussions, we've identified 4 themes that we wanted to address in the resources that we are creating. So firstly, diagnosis was really important to the group, particularly because 5 out of 6 of the co-researchers didn't receive a formal autism diagnosis until after the primary to secondary transition, which means that any resources that were specifically targeted towards supporting autistic girls during that transition wouldn't necessarily have been available to the majority of this group. And this gave us a lot to think about when we were deciding what we wanted to do in order to support the transition. So yeah, there's the ages that the group were diagnosed. Secondly, we talked about the school environment, and a lot of the difficulties that the girls talked about encountering are either caused by or exacerbated by an environment that doesn't suit their needs and is often very inflexible in mainstream schools. The third area that we talked about was support. All the girls were able to identify specific strategies that supported them in school, but their experiences were all very different. So an example of this is the use of timeout cards. Several of the girls had cards that they'd been given to enable them to leave a lesson if they were feeling overwhelmed. But in some of the schools, this meant the girls were able to just leave if they needed to. But in others, they're expected to take this card to the teacher and explain why they needed to use it, which meant that they very rarely used the cards, because when they were already feeling overwhelmed in a lesson, actually having that kind of need to go and communicate that to a teacher was something they didn't feel able to do. And as a result, the girls were avoiding going to lessons where they knew they might feel overwhelmed, or even avoiding school for the entire day when that lesson was timetabled. One thing that they all felt particularly strongly about was the lack of awareness among peers and school staff about what being autistic meant for them. They felt that autistic boys were better understood and supported. They also reflected a lot on all the positive aspects of being autistic and felt really strongly that this was a message that they wanted to share. So when I first started this project, I anticipated creating a suite of resources that could be provided for girls at primary school that they could then carry through with them through that transition into secondary school. And this changed quite quickly once I started working with FISAC, because only 1 out of the 6 girls, as I mentioned earlier, had their autism diagnosis at primary school. So it's unlikely that they would have had the benefit of the resources aimed at Year 6 autistic girls specifically. And in fact, at primary school, many of the girls were identified as having problems with anxiety, as being defiant or being extremely shy, and autism wasn't mentioned in terms of how they were coping at school. So FISAC felt that for them, it was the secondary school environment and the lack of understanding that actually made the transition difficult. So raising awareness of the experiences of autistic girls at the beginning of secondary school would be the most beneficial for those with and those without a diagnosis. So we have created resources, including a presentation that can be used in class or assemblies, and group and individual activities that can be done in PSHE or citizenship lessons or in tutor times. And we're actually actively recruiting schools right now to use and evaluate the resources. So if there are any people listening now who are from schools who would be interested in having us come in and share the resources with you, or if there's a particular school that you'd really like us to invite, please do get in touch. My email address will be on a slide a little bit later, and obviously Kathy's got my details as well. So once we've evaluated the resources in the final part of this research project and made any amendments that we feel we need to make, they will be made available free of charge for everyone to use. They will be put up on our website so people can just download them and use them as they will. And the website address, I think, is on the next slide as well. So that introduces the kind of main overview of the project that we are doing. As I've said, I'll talk a bit more about body mapping and how that works in a minute. But in the meantime, are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to make about the project? I can see there's something on the chat. You just scroll up.
I don't think there's any specific questions at the moment. I think you've answered the only question.
I'm sorry about the echo. I only have one microphone, so I don't think that's on my end. Is that still a problem?
No, it's not a problem.
Good. Super. Thank you, Michelle. I'm glad that you think it's worthwhile. I'm just seeing a question from Shannon saying, you mentioned about timeout cards. What would you recommend for girls who don't like to use timeout cards because they don't want to be recognised as different to others in their class? I think that's a very tricky one, because I think if somebody is feeling in a class and is feeling overwhelmed and feels that they need to leave that class, obviously there needs to be a mechanism to support them to do that, unless they feel that there's a strategy that they could use in class instead of the timeout card. I think it's quite difficult to fit in with the rest of the class if the problems that you're experiencing are different. And I think what we really need to try and do is to make people understand that that difference is not a bad thing. We certainly in Acorns very much promote the idea of neurodiversity, and that's something that is very much celebrated in the resources that we're using, and talking about the fact that everybody is different doesn't make anybody better or anybody worse. It's just accepting everybody. And I think that's really where we need to focus on schools. So I'm afraid I haven't got a magic solution to that, but it's certainly something that we need to carry on thinking about. And I've seen Annette is saying, do we have any people in the Northeast? No, we don't. This is all based in Southampton, but all the resources will be available to schools to use in the trial remotely. So it doesn't necessarily require us coming into the school and working with you. We will want to talk to some of the teachers and some of the pupils, but that can be done using online media. So if you are interested and you're in the Northeast, absolutely get in touch. You can still be involved. We've got a school in Norfolk, which is the furthest away that we're working with at the moment, but the Northeast would be fabulous. Do we work specifically with schools, or is there resources for GPs? At the moment, it's just in schools because of my experience as a teacher. That's kind of where my specialism is, so that's where I've started off. I have, however, created a leaflet that is school specific, that I could certainly be very interested in making a more GP specific one that's looking at autistic girls and the issues that autistic girls have. So yeah, certainly, Michelle, if you want to get in touch, I'd be really happy to talk about that leaflet and how we could maybe adapt it for GPs. That would be great. I'm really glad that your daughter's enjoying it, and I'm hoping
I love that comment, Jen.
Yeah, I do too. I hope that she'll have a go at the body mapping in a minute, because hopefully she'll really enjoy doing it.
And I wanted to chip in a bit on the timeout card.
Yeah.
I have had this situation with my daughter as well, who couldn't use a timeout card, because basically that means you have to out yourself to everybody. And what we went through various iterations of it. What was suggested was that in the school diary, which I know are called different things in different schools, the book that everyone has that they write their timetable in, it had some traffic light pages, red and green and amber. and it was suggested that she should put it onto amber so that she didn't have to say anything, or red so that she didn't have to say anything. The problem with that is that it depends on the teacher noticing, and of course some teacher are going to be a supply teacher or anything, so I can't say that it worked 100%, but it did work sometimes. So it was better than nothing. I think it's probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah, and obviously there's going to be some lessons, PE lessons and drama lessons. As an ex-drama teacher myself, I know that kind of thing can be quite tricky.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
But it's good. I've seen somebody else has asked a question about resources related to supporting people with autism to take part in sport or physical activity. I think that's a really interesting idea. It's not kind of in my specialism. I haven't really talked very much with my girls at all about sport, although there is an interesting picture of a PE teacher that you'll see a little bit later. But yeah, that would be very interesting. And certainly the resources that I'm creating, it would be really nice if once this project is over, we could start adapting them in all sorts of different ways. Yeah, wristbands, but again, relies on the teacher noticing. I think this is why it's so important that the cards don't necessarily need to be shown in lessons. And some of the girls were saying that what they can do is they can just get up and leave, and there's a particular place that they go to. I think on the slide I mentioned that it was called the hub, and they could go to the hub, and because they had this card, it wasn't necessary that they actually had to physically show the card, but the fact that they owned that card meant that they could go to the hub. And I think because they had it, if they were stopped in the corridor along the way or something, then they could prove that they were there for a good reason. Yeah, I think Kathy's probably your person to answer questions about timeout cards. Again, it's not something that I know a huge amount about. So yeah, a GP resource. PDA is pathological demand avoidance, so it's for young people that find it very difficult if they're given an instruction, that can make them very anxious, and it means they find it quite difficult to follow instructions. And PE sport environment, often very difficult. Somebody's answered the questions. Yeah, they're a different language. I think my language was a bit old then, so I apologise.
No, your language wasn't old. That is what it's diagnosed as, if you can get a diagnosis at all. I just prefer to use persistent demand for autonomy. It's much more,
I like it. Yeah, it's much more
real
language. Yeah, absolutely. And we try and avoid the kind of deficit-based language as much as we possibly can. So that's
okay. So shall we stop questions now, and we'll let you move on.
Super. So body mapping. So mapping is a technique that has its roots in health research. And a guide for using it was developed by a lady called Jane Solomon as part of a project supporting women in South Africa with HIV. And she describes it as something that can be used in many different ways. It can be a tool for using art in a healing way. It's also good for helping people to remember things from their lives. And it can help people to find answers to the problems that face them today or may happen in the future. But most of all, body mapping is a good way of helping people to tell their life stories. It's been used since Solomon first wrote this guide in 2006 with many different groups of people, including young adults with psychosis, older people receiving dialysis for kidney failure, and young people with complex support needs navigating planning for the future. But there is, to my knowledge, no research involving using body mapping with autistic young people, although I do know that there is a study being done currently in Australia that's investigating friendships using body mapping. So we're kind of working kind of alongside each other in terms of navigating how we can use body mapping. I felt when I first read about it that it had real potential as a method to support autistic children to talk about their experiences in education. So I will explain a bit more about what it is and why I chose to use it. So these images are body maps that formed a pilot study to see whether children, including those with an autism diagnosis, enjoyed doing body mapping and felt that it was a good way to explore their experiences with transitions. So it's a very flexible technique. It can be adapted very much to suit the situation. So what I will do this evening is I'll talk through the process that I used for this pilot study as an example, but you can change a lot of the kind of tasks and the focus of the different images that you create to suit the conversation that you're wanting to have with the young people. So the first thing that we do is draw around the outline of a body on a large sheet of paper. And when I was working with the young people, that they all had a parent to draw the outline so that it wouldn't be uncomfortable for them. But obviously, if you've got a group of young people, they might draw around each other if they feel happy to do that. They then chose colours for the outline that they thought represented them. So the purple and the pink on the left were chosen because they were her favourite colours. The green on the right was chosen because it was a calm colour and the young person was feeling calm when they were painting this image. So once they had done their outline, the next task was to decorate one hand in a way that described what they felt they were like or activities they enjoyed. So you might notice a game controller next to the hand of the central figure. This young person preferred to put the image next to the hand rather than on it, which is absolutely fine. As I say, it's a flexible way of doing things. It's not prescriptive. Next, they were asked to represent home on their body maps. And for this, they chose not only how to represent it, but also where they wanted to place it on the body map. And interestingly, in this pilot, all but one placed home on the heart because they linked it with love. We then started to talk a little bit about transitions and think about how they're going to represent transitions on the body maps. And the next tasks in this pilot were dependent on the transitions we were focusing on. So for some of the young people in this part of the study, it was the transition to secondary school or the transition to sixth form college. Others were talking about transitions within the school day. So images were chosen to represent before and after of these transitions. And then they chose a way to draw the link between them. So for example, there could be a picture of a primary school classroom placed by the feet because it was finished with and not thought about anymore. And then a picture of new friends at secondary school near the head because they were important. And then the two images were joined with a line that was sometimes straight and sometimes zigzagged to represent how the transition was sometimes difficult, but not always. And then finally in the pilot, they chose an image to represent the idea of support. So thinking about people that have supported them with transitions or activities or behaviours, and any kind of gadgets that they have that they find supportive, any interests that they have that they feel if they engage in spending time with that interest, then that makes them feel better and feel supported in difficult times. So on the figure in the middle, you can see a list on one side that's really nice and neat, and then one on the other side that shows what happens when things get in the way of completing their list. So for this person, writing lists and doing things in order was one thing that they found really supportive. And then if things went wrong and they couldn't work through their list in order, they found that really difficult. So that's what they chose to represent. Halfway through doing this pilot, everything locked down in COVID. So I wasn't able to do all of the body mapping for this pilot study in person. And many thanks to Michelle in Australia, who, as I said, is also doing some body mapping. She introduced me to a piece of software called Autodraw. And Autodraw allows you to do a mixture of freehand drawing and chosen images. So what you can do is you can start to draw the shape of something, and Autodraw will give you a kind of list of different images that you might have been trying to draw when you were doing this. So you can see that the figure in red and the figure in purple, they've both got quite a few images that have been done in Autodraw. So the image in red has got the hand that was done with Autodraw. And the image in purple has obviously got quite a lot of different Autodraw pictures. The young person that did the one in orange didn't like Autodraw very much and chose to freehand everything. This worked quite well considering the problems we're having at the time of lockdown, because obviously it meant that I could do body mapping with the young people from a distance. but I really felt that working on a screen rather than in the kind of more active, creative way, so having an entire body-sized image to create the pictures on, I think just gives it an extra sense of creativity, and I think that's lost a little bit through doing it on screen. It's possible, but I think most of them really enjoyed doing the kind of big, huge pictures. So the reason that I was with using body mapping is that I felt that it would encourage young people to think about and share their experiences in an interesting and creative way. It encourages them to think about and select the information that they choose and how they choose to represent it, and also where on the map they think it should be placed. And I think it makes it far more meaningful than the information that you can get from a traditional interview. I don't know about you, but I quite often think of things that I should have said when talking to people long after the conversation is over. Usually the next morning when I'm traveling to work, I think of things that I wish I'd said the previous day. And the advantage of body mapping is that you can keep adding to it. With this pilot study, we did these body maps in one session. With PhysAc, we did them over the period of 10 weeks. So we were able to keep adding to those images and putting things on that we hadn't thought about previously, which was fantastic. And that was one of the most important lessons I learned through doing the pilot, that it's a real advantage to work on it over several sessions rather than trying to do it all at once. So the feedback from the young people and their parents in the pilot on completing the body mapping tasks were overwhelmingly in favour. They felt it was engaging. It really helped them to think about things in a different way. And there are some reflections from parents here. I'll give you a moment to read them while I have a sip of water. So I'm now going to show you some examples of elements of the body maps created by the PhysAc group. So this first one's a really lovely example of how being creative with resources really helps to get the meaning across. So using the word in sandpaper rather than choosing to paint or to use pens, I think really showed how this young person felt about their time at primary school. So this young person says, this is my primary school drawing. I'm going to stick it in the middle of my body. Some of the young people didn't have space in the rooms that they were meeting, attending the PhysAc meetings, to have their whole bit of, they drew some smaller pictures and then stuck them on their bigger map when they had a bit more space. The person said, I'm going to stick it in the middle of my body to represent how I internalized everything that happened. And they're the stick person outlined in yellow. So thinking about the positioning of images on the map really encourages you to think about the embodied experiences. And in this case, it's about how the implications of different difficult experiences at primary school have remained with her and still impact the way she interacts with people. And if you place this image outside the body, it could have actually given it a very different meaning. The fact that she in the middle of the body really shows you what a profound experience that was for her. Again, we can see the influence of the positioning on this image and having the time to sit down and choose what she wanted to put on her map rather than just describing her primary school experiences in an interview, I think has made this all the more powerful. I'm actually going to read this description aloud because it's a story that I'm going to come back to a little bit later on, and it's a very powerful one that really. She says, I put this section in my head because I'm always thinking about my time at primary school. Being invited to parties and having friends were rare. I played hide and seek with the trees when my best friend didn't with me. I tried to go on the school council every year, but I didn't get chosen. In year 6, I signed up to every job, but I didn't get any of the jobs or the badges that went with them. And everyone in the class had one apart from me and my best friend. I've drawn my one-to-one LSA and my first best teacher. They understood me and were kind. I liked sitting under tables as I felt comfortable there. I've drawn an eye and a flower to represent the fear of my name being called out in assembly. The teacher was my first teacher. The wall and the gate was not tall enough and I didn't feel safe. I would just like to say that this young person now goes to a fantastic school and is incredibly happy, had a very difficult primary experience, but is now very happy at school and really thriving. So I have found quite a lot of the stories the girls that have shared with me really upsetting and really frustrating, because so many of them are so avoidable with better understanding of neurodiversity. And I think that's really what me and the rest of the Physac group are trying to get people to understand better their experiences. There are, however, some of the images that are a bit more universal. So I've chosen this as a slightly more light-hearted one to share. So this is from the pilot study. And this includes an image on the right in black that represents an aspect of school that this young person, who greatly enjoys school on the whole, but this is one aspect that he was less keen on. So the smaller figure running away is himself, and the larger figure with the terrifying eyebrows is his PE teacher, who is trying to get him to play rugby. So apologies to those of you that were asking for help with how to support autistic people in physical education and PE. This, I think, was the sum total of my conversation with the young people about PE lessons, was this lovely PE teacher with the big eyebrows. So it's just about your turn to have a go at a bit of body mapping. So I'm not going to ask you to create a life-size map, although if you've got the space and a big enough piece of paper, you are very welcome to do so. But we're just going to work on one task, and for now, just think about where it might be placed on the body rather than putting it on a specific place on a map. So this is a task that Physac were asked to do, and it involves thinking about where your power comes from. So we talked about how everybody draws on different things to give them strength. And so I've created, as an example, an image on the slide of a power symbol for a fictional character. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. Has anybody got an idea from this who this fictional character might be? Yes, well done, Michelle. This is Sherlock Holmes' power symbol. So we've got a red cross to represent Dr. Watson and a cup of tea, which is Mrs. Hudson. And we've got Sherlock Holmes's violin and pipe, which are two things that that he uses to kind of relax him, and that can kind of recharge his power. And then we've got a diagram of a brain and some equations to show his extreme intelligence and how he can solve all sorts of crimes, and obviously surrounded by a magnifying glass. So this is an example of what Sherlock Holmes's power symbol might look like, and he might choose to place it on the head, because obviously everything he does is very much using his intelligence. So what I am going to do is to put a link, and I think I'm going to have to stop sharing before I can do this, but I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Padlet, and it will be absolutely fantastic if people were brave enough to upload some images of their power symbols on the Padlet. You can just take a photograph and upload that. I'll also put the link to Autodraw. So I used Autodraw to create some of this image. And obviously you've seen the previous maps with Autodraw, so feel free to use Autodraw if you'd like to. So I'll put both of those up, and I think, Kathy, if it's all right, I think we'll probably have about 15 minutes to have a go at these.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Super. So I will stop sharing for a minute so I can put up the Padlet and the Autodraw. But good luck, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of them.
So I should probably just say you do need to go to the Padlet on another tab. So don't close this tab.
No, if you click on it in the link, it should open on a separate tab.
I hope everybody's thinking about their power symbols. So you might need to give a quick summary of how to use Padlet, Chloe.
Okay, if you click on the link into Padlet, what I will do is I'll just put up a quick kind of demo of how you need to do it. You basically click on the cross in the bottom right hand corner, and that will give you a little screen that opens, and then you can upload your picture onto that. But I'll put a little how-to guide onto the Padlet itself. Just to say, there are some amazing images coming up on the Padlet, so if anybody is a bit stuck, please just have a look at it and see what's there already, because I think it will really inspire you to come up with some ideas. Were you keeping an eye on the time? I think we've got a couple of minutes left. Am I about on track, or if we have nearly 15 minutes?
Yes, I think we've got 1 more minute, I think.
Okay, thanks. Right, I've put my glasses on because I'm hearing so intently at these amazing images. Do feel free to carry on creating while I'm talking. That's absolutely fine. The next few slides are not quite as visual as the previous ones, so please feel free to carry on and do keep adding things to the Padlet. Kathy, if you're happy to, I'll leave the Padlet up until Monday, so people can have a look. I will take it down at the end of the day on Monday, so
yeah, absolutely,
feel free to log in and have another look at them. What you can do on the Padlet is if you click on the 3 dots in the top right hand corner of any particular image, that will make that image bigger. So there are some amazingly intricate drawings that people are putting on there, so it'd be nice to see them close up. And I'm glad people are enjoying Autodraw. I think it's a really fabulous piece of software, really good fun. Super, right, I shall go back to my slides. Kathy, can you see my power symbol slide again? Does that come back?
Yes,
up
I can.
Super. So, what I'd really like to do, just quickly talk through a bit about the way that we're now using this body mapping to kind of to further this research. So obviously body mapping itself is a fantastic thing to use, and it's a really good tool to stimulate conversation. It's a really lovely way to get young people to talk about how they're thinking and feeling about things. But on top of that, for this project, we need to kind of work out what we're going to do next with it. And so I have been really thinking about what to do with such a wealth of powerful stories being shared through the body maps. And I've been really struggling to decide how I'm going to analyse them as data. And as I'm doing a PhD, that's one of the things that I have to do. So I kind of looked up some definitions of what data analysis is in order to try and help me to work out what I'm going to do with it. And this is the kind of definition that really didn't help. It just felt like lots of words, and it just felt like it was really taking away from the power and the beauty of the stories that the girls were telling. So I carried on looking, and I really thought about what I wanted to do with this analysis. So again, I've said it before and I will say it many times in my research, it's about promoting the voices of the autistic girls in a meaningful way. And that included being able to share the work that we're doing with a really wide range of audiences. So I didn't want to just write academic papers to be published in journals. I didn't just want to write a thesis. I wanted to find ways to share these stories and the girls' voices. I also wanted to ensure that the girls could get involved in the process so that they felt that they were being accurately represented. I didn't want to take their images and say, from this image, I think that this is what they were trying to portray. It was really important for me that it was them telling us what they were going to portray. And as part of that, I've spent a lot of time considering the double empathy problem in the way that we deal with their stories. So the double empathy problem is, sorry, my slide's not appearing. It's something Damien Milton's a good person to look up if you want to find out more about the double empathy problem. And he explains how there's a disconnect in social communication between autistic and non-autistic people. So it's not that autistic people lack empathy or social skills as used to be described in the literature about autism, but it's that the skills required for effective communication between people of different neurotypes are lacking on both sides. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to have a look at this image.
Chloe, there's a quick question in the chat. What was the decorated hand representing? She missed that bit. Okay,
the decorated hand was the first activity that they did in both the pilot task and the PhysAct task, and it was just to get them to start thinking about how they could represent things on their image. So that hand was representing them. So they included activities they enjoyed doing. They used the colours that they liked. They put names of people that they liked on their hands. So it was the hand was kind of the representation of them and what they thought that they wanted to show about in general. So in terms of thinking about the double empathy problem and finding ways that I, as a non-autistic researcher, could represent the voices of autistic girls in the best way possible, I'm experimenting with something that I'm calling narrative perspectives. And this involves first of all, choosing which stories we as a group feel are important to share. And some of that is based on the themes that I described earlier, the four kind of main themes of our research. And so choosing these stories involves looking at the body maps, thinking about which events or feelings represented on the maps the girls really want to kind of take forward and to share more widely. Once they've chosen the stories, we then create stories from two different perspectives. So from the autistic perspective and from a narrative perspective. I'll give you an example of this in just a minute. Once we've created those stories, we read them several times and we really explore how we feel the different perspectives help us to better understand the impact of the stories that are being told. And for this piece of research, we're linking all of our stories with a character that we've created for our resources called Maggie. So it's all telling Maggie's story, but using experience that the girls in Physac have lived through it themselves. So all of the stories are involving this central character called Maggie. So this is an example of one of them. This is based on the story that I shared earlier in the presentation about the girl that wasn't feeling safe at school. I will read it through, and obviously you can follow it on the slide, but I think it's useful to have it read out loud. So this is the narrative account.
Chloe, I think your presentation has switched from slideshow because we can see your notes.
No. Let me stop sharing and try again.
We're plagued by technical hitches this evening.
I know. I do this a lot. I actually gave a whole presentation with the notes, and one of the autistic people watching the presentation actually said that they really enjoyed it because they liked seeing what was coming next. But obviously,
yeah, it doesn't bother me.
it's a little bit tricky, however, when some of the images are quite small. How's that? Are you still seeing my notes now?
We're not. Oh, we might see your notes at the bottom. It's not in slideshow. We're seeing all of the slides, so we're seeing them at the side as well. I'm sure we can live with it.
I haven't got that many slides left, to be honest. So
yeah, don't worry about it.
Okie dokes. I will read it out because obviously if you're on a small screen, you certainly won't be able to see it. So this is our narrative account. So Maggie is 8 years old. She's tall for her age, with long dark brown hair and golden skin with a dusting of freckles. She's an attractive child and looks very like her mother, Sally, who walks her to school every morning. Sally is smartly dressed and has an efficient air about her. It's Maggie's grandmother who collects her at the end of the day. Maggie always speeds up when she passes the last house before the school boundary. She moves closer to her mother, tightens her grip on her hand, and looks intently at the toy she's holding. It looks like she's in a hurry to get to school, but doesn't look around to greet her friends like many of the other children are doing. When they get into the playground, Sally passes Maggie's hand to Miss Bird as if she were giving her a precious object. "Any problems this morning?" Miss Bird asks Sally. "No, we've had a good morning, haven't we, Maggie?" Maggie brings her toy closer to her face. "Come on then, Maggie. We're going to go into the classroom, hang up your things, then have a look at a book about Sierra Sloth that I found in the library." As Maggie walks into the classroom with Miss Bird, she glances briefly back at the school gate where her mother is hurrying off to work. Okay, and this is the same story from Maggie's perspective, and just a reminder of the picture that inspired this story. And my mum is calling me downstairs. I hold her hand as she opens the door and we walk to school. As we get nearer, I start to worry about if I'll be alone at break time again today and having no friends. We arrive at school and I see the wall and gate, which isn't tall enough. I get even more anxious about someone breaking in the school. I hold my mum's hand even tighter and try not to make eye contact with the wall and gate. I go over to Miss Bird with my mum because I have no friends to talk to. Miss Bird speaks with my mum and I hide myself behind my elephant toy. After their conversation, Miss Bird tells me about a book which I'm excited about. My mum hands me over to my teacher and I look down because I don't like looking at people's eyes or mouth. We walk into school and I look back at the dangerous wall and gate, and I think that's the reason why I don't feel safe in school.
Sorry, Chloe, the slides aren't moving again, so we're still on narrative account.
Okie dokes. let me stop sharing and try again. It was all going so well to begin with.
Okay, so now we can see the Maggie's story slide.
Lovely. So we created these stories. This is based on the young lady that did this image that's here at the top. So we created this story, and the two of us together, and then we've shared it with the rest of the PhysAct group and talked about how they felt about it. So all the members of the group felt a real connection to the story. They all really resonated with the feeling of not feeling safe at school at various times. Their reasons for not feeling safe were different, but they could really recognise the impact as described in this story. I feel that it helps us as adults to recognise the importance of identifying patterns in behaviour in children. So if the staff at Maggie's school had actually asked why she always hurried past the wall and gate, and why she always had this kind of urge to look back at the wall and gate, if they'd actually talked to her about that and noticed that as a pattern, then they might have been able to alleviate her anxiety about being in school. So it's thinking about what the story tells us about Maggie's experience, but also what we can learn from it, and what we can potentially do in order to support the young people. So we've got several stories like this, different aspects of school. We've got one about the difficulties of wearing a school uniform. We've got one about an occasion when a young person had a meltdown at school and what that was like, and what caused that. So we've got lots of different stories telling these different issues. So this work is very much ongoing. So if anybody's got any thoughts or opinions, I would very much value you sharing them with me. So I'm going to be speaking in more detail about my work with PhysAct and how we've conducted the analysis of the body maps in an open lab meeting, which is going to be at 9:30 on Friday, the 27th of May. So if anyone's interested in attending the event, some of the content will be the same as today, because obviously I'll give a kind of quick overview of the research, but I will share a bit more about how it's been working with PhysAct. So if anybody would like to come along, please just send me an email and I can send you a link. It's completely free to attend, and there will be a recording of the talk available afterwards. So do email me and I can get back to you. So before kind of final Q&As, I just wanted to thank Kathy very much for inviting me to speak this evening. I also, as always, want to thank the Acorns team and my supervisors, Hannah and Sarah. And most importantly, the PhysAct team, Fedakeen, Iris, Zainab, Zoe, Annie and Caris. I couldn't wish for better co-researchers. They have been amazing. And I also have to mention that my research is funded by the ESRC through a scholarship with the South Coast Doctoral Training Partnership. So
Sorry, could you put your
final
email?
Questions?
Could you?
My email is on this last slide. So I'm just saying a copy of the slides. I can get you a copy of most of the slides. I might have to edit a couple just in case there are any details, because obviously it's sharing information that's come from some of the young people. So I'll just have to double check with that, but certainly I can share all of the slides that I've created myself. So yes, I will arrange that with Kathy. Just reading Claire's message. Good. Lovely to know that you want to share it in schools across Essex. So certainly if there are any schools that are interested in having a look at the resources that we've created, as I say, we've got it's a 6-minute presentation that kind of gives an overview that can be used in an assembly or a lesson, and then we've got activities that that can be done in a lesson or in tutor times that are all about our character Maggie. So it's telling Maggie's story, and hopefully getting teachers and other young people in lessons to better understand the concept of neurodiversity and what it's like for autistic girls in school.
I also think that it would be fabulous if some teachers or maybe Senkos could get together a little group and do some body mapping, maybe with a teacher that the young people felt safe with, because I think it's really, really powerful, isn't it, seeing those two different sided narratives and realizing that the way that you saw something happening was not the way that it actually happened for somebody else. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. I've just seen that Jen says in the chat, will I share the other ones that I've written? Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to work out how I'm going to share these stories. I was speaking to a colleague this morning who is a clinical psychologist, who was saying that they're within clinical psychology, they're putting together all these resources that are first-hand accounts of experiences that people with different mental health conditions have had. So there's this kind of big depository of all this information, and it would be really nice. Obviously, autism is not a mental health, so I would not put it there, but to find somewhere else that we could share some of these stories, and we can really promote these voices in some way. And certainly I'm thinking about, I am writing a chapter in a book that will be coming out in 2023 that's about the stories themselves, but that will be quite a short chapter and I won't be able to include many of the stories in that. So I'm kind of thinking, can we put it together and maybe kind of turn it into a book in some way? Something to think about.
We could perhaps do something on our website as well, Chloe.
Yeah, that would be lovely. And it's something that is so easy to do in practice, really. It's so easy to get one of the young people to write a story from their perspective and really think about, okay, if you were looking at that event from your perspective as a speech and language therapist, as a parent, as a teacher, as a friend, how would you have seen that story happening differently? What would be your different perspective on it, and what can you therefore learn from the story that the young people were sharing?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be opening some groups soon, and I think this would be a really good thing to do in the groups as well. But we need some big sheets of paper.
Yes. Yeah, the girls were very excited because they received an enormous parcel through the post. So I gave them 2 life-size pieces of paper, and one of the girls was 5'11", so they were very big pieces of paper, and all sorts of resources. So they had kind of sequins and glitter and paints and different kinds of paper that they could stick on, all sorts of things. So yeah, they were very excited to get the parcels. It's nice to hear that people are watching with their daughters, having a go at doing the power symbols. There's some really beautiful power symbols on the Padlet, so do have another look. Particularly those of you that posted yours early, do have another look. Yeah, it's interesting, somebody saying that from an independent school in the Northwest, having a lot of students who don't have a diagnosis but are possibly autistic. And I think, the girls all felt very strongly that their diagnosis was a positive thing, and they were all really glad that they had it, particularly the ones that got it. So one of the group didn't get her diagnosis until she was at sixth form college, and it just helped her to understand so much of the difficulties that she was having at school, and she said that it was just such a relief, and she felt that she'd kind of found her tribe and understood herself for the first time. But I think by raising awareness within schools and to talk to young people about how autistic girls and autistic boys are very different, and the stereotypes that we so often see in the media are based on white middle-class autistic boys who obviously need lots of help and support as well, but it's really kind of opening people's eyes up to the fact that girls with autism can often present very differently and be perceived as having all sorts of other issues going on that they haven't. Jen says, write your own book. I will do my best.
We did research on transition to secondary last year. Did it for part of my master's, but did it as the Autistic Girls Network. Yeah. And of the 17 pupils who were part of that, only I think 6 were diagnosed at primary school. So same thing happening. 2 out of the 17 weren't diagnosed until they were 17. So as we know, it's not a surprise to us, is it? But as we know, that's a common theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I've talked about with the girls is had they watched the presentation that we've created when they were in year 7, the ones that weren't diagnosed at that point, would they have recognised themselves in it? Some of them said yes, absolutely. Others said no, probably not at that stage, but it might have made me think. And we are within the pilot that we're taking out to schools with these resources, we're making sure that parents have got a lot of information about what it is that their children are seeing as well, so that some of the if the girls do come home and say to their parents, I have this assembly today, the parents of what happens, that they can use those conversations on, and obviously sharing lots of links with them so that they can follow up. Yeah, a great resource for non-verbal children too, absolutely. When I first started this research before lockdown happened, I was actually working in a special school, and I was kind of trying to come up with lots of creative ideas about how to support children in special schools who are largely non-verbal with their transitions. But unfortunately, because of lockdown, because I wasn't able to get into the school and working with that group of young people, you can't do online. It just didn't work. So that was a real disappointment, but I'd certainly like to look at ways that this can be advanced.
Okay, I can't see any more questions in the chat. So I think we can end it there. And thank you very much, Chloe, for coming along. It was really fascinating. I can't wait to see the finished articles. And there will be. We have recorded this, and we will be putting it, as long as it's okay with Chloe, we will be putting it on our YouTube channel as soon as I can manage that, quite frankly, in a few days' time, probably. So thank you everybody for coming. Oh, sorry, there's a last question. Is there somewhere I can look for more info on body mapping?
I think the best thing to do is to email me and I'll send you some links. So my email address I will add, just again, it's c.east@sutton.ac.uk. So send me an email and I'll send you some names to look up.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So the Padlet is going to be open until Monday morning, did you say?
Monday afternoon.
Monday afternoon.
Close it down at the end of work on Monday.
Okay, so if anyone wants to add something to the Padlet, or if their daughters want to add something to the Padlet, then please feel free to go ahead with that. Chloe, do you want me to share the Padlet on social media, or do you only want the people who were here and who've seen your presentation?
I am perfectly happy for you to share it. Obviously, it's as long as the people that have shared their images, but I think they're nameless, so I don't think there's anything identifying on that. So
I'll have a look at it and make sure that there's nothing.
If anybody would prefer their image not to be shared, it's quite easy to take it off. So take it off. Maybe if you wait until Monday.
Yes.
Yeah,
will do.
And then anyone that wants to take it off can do it between now and Monday.
Okay. Right. Well, I hope everybody has a lovely rest of the evening, or if you're going straight to bed, then I hope you have a lovely sleep. And thanks, Chloe, for coming along. It's been really, really good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.